Hi, today we're going to talk about martial arts in the 70s, and we're going to have some memories of an early Chris Price. We're going to speak with Martin Smith. Martin Smith is now leading London Bridge Systema, but he has a very long story in martial arts. Well, the world of martial arts is very little, and Martin is one of the first people I met here in UK. We were training together in central London. Then, big city life. We lost contact and we kept contacting, chatting on Facebook until one day I wrote a post about Chris, and he commented and he wrote me that he used to be a Chris student in the 70s. We had to talk again. I had to thank Martin. He's a very nice guy with a very long experience, a lot of things to talk about, and this talk will be interesting for all of you.
How was the training with Chris? The stuff or
yeah, he was always pushing you, but I mean, I think martial arts training then was probably reasonably tough anyway. People that sort of tended to stay with martial arts in those days were I would probably categorise them as what we would call nutters. They had something a bit loose in their head because you wanted to bash people a lot. And I think that's a necessity for martial arts, but that was the sequence. You got a lot of people coming in and out of those schools, and in the early days, for the Japanese instructors and everybody else, the reason why they didn't succeed very well in the early days is because they hit people and they thought they could carry on the way they did in their own countries and brutalise their students, and it didn't go down too well. People used to just move on. So the guys that used to stay with them, they would become very hard, not necessarily great fighters, but they'd become very hard and tough.
yeah.
And that kept the reputation up, and that's all that mattered really. You knew if you were going to fight these guys, it wasn't that they were great fighters, but it was going to give you a hard time. You were both going to come out of there injured. Nothing was easy.
Yeah.
And that was kind of how it went.
The spirit of the martial arts.
Yeah, but it was basically because they had screw loose.
Yeah.
Psychopaths of the styles. And I suppose maybe I can be categorised as one of those to a certain degree because I stayed with it. So
you enjoyed it.
Who knows? I was a bit soft really. That brings me back to why things like Lao and TKD and Taekwondo were good in the competition field, because they were more upright, they were more fluid and more flowing in their structure, and they were more or less free to express yourself.
Yeah.
Whereas the other styles they weren't, and they were all training towards a point fighting system.
Yeah.
Whereas Taekwondo in those days, it was more like boxing with the feet, and you could punch the hands, the body arm. But we were encouraged to hit hard. All the movements were designed to create momentum to increase the power of your kick and stuff. Circular spinning kicks and stuff like this. It was all about developing that power to kick harder so you could knock the guy to get your point in the competition. And it was continuous, so your training was similar to the other combat styles that are there, were like you do now for your kickboxing for a set time period, so you trained 3, 5 or whatever the round minute was, and then you were focused. It was most amateur stuff was 3 minutes then, and I think it still is now. Is it 3 minute rounds?
Oh, you've got 2 minutes.
2 minute rounds, right? And what do you do? Three 2 minute rounds, or 5 3 minute rounds, or 2 minute rounds?
I do in a fight. I do 2 rounds,
right,
because I'm an old man. I'm a master.
You look so old.
But I'm a man, 48. I'm a master, aka old man. But usually it's 3 rounds at 2 minutes, which is tough.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I mean, do you just wear hand protectors, head guard now?
Yeah.
You don't wear the old body armour?
No.
Have you tried the body armour?
No, I hate
Exhausting.
it. Yeah.
Exhausting.
I tried, but I hate it. Yeah.
And it used to be like heavy sort of like leather or synthetic leather, and it used to have bamboo strips inside it. So when you used to get hit on that, the bamboo used to really sort of penetrate your body. But and then after that, they became more foam filled and stuff, and it's a bit easier. But then it became a bit what we tended to call a bit more la-di-da. It was a bit dancing more, because when technology took over, you only had to touch the targets to get your score point. It became a bit like fencing. Whereas originally, to make an effect on the person, especially if they've got protective equipment, you'd have to ding them pretty hard. But once the technology took over and the sensors picked up the point, you just had to touch it right, and the technique became very different.
Just tapping, yeah.
Yeah, but it wasn't just that. All the techniques became range techniques, yeah? And so everybody started kicking with the open instep and stuff. Whereas in the early days of training, you never kick with the instep because the mechanics of your foot are in there. You're hitting something hard, they get smashed. Small bones, big bones don't mix.
Yeah.
So you were destroying your foot. So classic styles were always the ball of the foot, or heel and supported by the structure of the leg.
In the runner's kick, you use the ball of the foot.
Yeah, instep and extension, or it was the shin. So it was only big bone that you would hit targets with because you didn't want to smash your foot up. So combat's very, very different in that sense.
Yeah.
Then you get the competition where everything was range techniques. So all the top coaches then were teaching overextension and things like that. Of course, that led to injuries as well because everyone was overreaching, putting their spines out. And in those early days of training, people weren't doing the serious conditioning that you might do now when you get professional fighters that spend an awful lot of time preparing the body for a tournament and competition. Then you didn't. As I said, Chris was very keen on competition. We would turn up at the class and he'd say, "Oh, you're busy next weekend. Got a competition down here or over there or something, or I've got a group of people coming out." And sometimes I can remember just turning up at the class because we didn't have messaging service and everything else. You didn't know what was going on half the time.
Yeah.
You would just turn up in the class and, "Oh, I've invited some people from this karate club at the other side of Bromley."
It was, you started with Chris in the 75, you said?
About 75.
Yeah, it's another era, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you just turn up and there was a competition on. Sometimes you get to hear about it or whatever, but of course not. And so the advantage is you didn't get time for the the moist underwear syndrome. You didn't go through the fear factor because it was suddenly thrown at you. You didn't have time to prepare for it. Some of the other competitions, yeah. I mean, I got to the British Nationals with Chris. He took me to the British Nationals at one time. I got the first day. Yeah, I mean, the club sort of stretched on, and I kind of felt I probably did self-sabotage because I was always looking to move on to the next stage, and you unconsciously do these things, don't you? Because you can only change your style to a certain degree before people sort of lose interest in what you're doing if they're focused on one aspect of it.
Yeah.
And more styles became, people became aware of more of other things and films and stuff which influenced the Queen children and the others. They became dominant. It was the introduction of those through the media that otherwise people would be doing the sensual stuff, boxing, wrestling and that sort of thing because they were fantastic arts. But that was one thing Chris was quite keen on as well, was wrestling. He did some wrestling for a while. I can't remember the name of the school he used to go to. It was a wrestling club on the other side. But yeah, he did do that for a while.
Yeah, I see.
He tried to share some of that, but again, it was difficult for him in the Taekwondo environment. But anything you did was very much that style. You had to stick with that style, and it was considered wrong to sort of mix them up. But, there was a couple of us that trained with Chris that were very close, and we would go off training at all the other clubs, and Chris encouraged us to do that. And we used to train with several kung fu styles, karate styles and things, and we just used to turn up. We got to know the instructors and they would allow us to come into their gyms and stuff. And it's looking at all these little bits and pieces and saying, how this works. I mean, I remember Brilliant Boys Club, and there was a couple of boxing gyms, and I started those when I was still a kid at school. When I was introduced by a friend who was in class, his mum saw me as somebody who was getting bullied at school and said to her son, "Well, you need to take him down to the boxing club." So we went off down there. They used to get in there. The first thing the coach used to do is make me go back out and run.
Yeah.
So you'd have to go and run a mile, half a mile, whatever it was, depending on the club you were at. Then you come in, do your skipping, the bag work and everything else, do your drills, and then you'd end up with a bit of ring work. And that was your routine, near enough 99% of the time. And one of the things Chris was very keen on, because I mean boxing then was mainly professional or AMA, amateur boxing, and he was always saying that your average amateur boxer, even just the person who visits the club regularly, was fitter than 90% of martial artists that were around.
Yeah.
And it was exactly
He
true.
kept saying that, yeah.
Because of the focus on the workload they do. Chris made us go down to the boxing club to train. The senior students would go down to the one at Bellingham Boys Club. He would take synergists closely, and we'd have to do the skipping, the bag work and things like that. And that was for a Taekwondo club.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the way Chris was. He recognised what stuff was good, and he put it to you. But it was up to you whether you did it. There were plenty of guys at the club that didn't, but they kept the club going. They kept buying the equipment for the club and things like that. And I think that's the same with every school. You've got a need for those people that don't want to do real martial arts, and you have to cater for that. And that brings us back to a club being holistic, where it's got its box size, it's got its forms, it's got every bit. Because there's something for everybody. And I suppose that's what's nice about the traditional styles competition. You have those aspects which draw all the punters in, if that's what we want to call them. Because they are students, but that's what they are. They're a necessary part of any club, because a club collapses without them.
But the things that I see in practical boxing, I don't know if it was the same at your time, that he had, probably because he was an engineer, so he put the skill into creating a new system that worked as a system. As I said, it's the total is more than the sum of the single parts.
Exactly.
That was the way.
Which is why he left Taekwondo, because it was too restrictive for him to have these other things. MMA wasn't really a thing in this country. It was starting in the States, mixed martial arts.